The day my brother-in-law told my son he wasn't a real Coleman in front of 40 people at my daughter's graduation party was the day I stopped writing checks. I never should have been writing in the first place, and I promise you, that silence had cost me more than any of them ever knew. All right, settle in, grab your coffee, whatever you've got. Drop me a line and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I always like knowing who's out there listening. But I've got to take you back to the beginning, because if I start at the party, you're going to miss the 17 years that made it land the way it did. My name is Frank Coleman. I'm 61 years old, and I've spent the better part of 4 decades building a small fleet of auto repair shops across the Cleveland suburbs. Started with one bay and a rusted lift I bought off a guy who was going out of business. Now I've got 4 locations, 22 employees, and a reputation that took me longer to build than I care to admit. I still open the first shop myself most Saturday mornings, just because I like the smell of the place before anyone else gets there. My wife is Diane. 60 years old, retired school teacher, the kind of woman who remembers every student's name 20 years later and still gets Christmas cards from half of them. We've been married 31 years. Not survived, not endured married, in the real sense, the kind where I still look forward to her walking through the door at the end of the day. We have one son, Michael, 26 now, works as a paramedic over in Parma. And we have a daughter, Sophie, 22, who just graduated from Ohio State with a nursing degree and was, on the day all this happened, about to start her first job at a hospital downtown. Here's the thing about Sophie and Michael. I didn't father them. Diane's first husband did, before he decided fatherhood wasn't for him and left when Michael was 4 and Sophie was barely walking. I came into the picture 2 years later, and I made a decision early on that I've never once regretted. I adopted them both, legally, formally, the whole process, when Michael was 7 and Sophie was 5. Not raised them like my own. Not practically my kids. My kids. Full stop. I walked Sophie down the aisle at her middle school graduation dance because her biological father didn't show. I taught Michael to drive stick in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning. There is no asterisk on that relationship, and there never has been, not in my house. Now, Diane has a sister, Carol, 58 years old, lives out in Strongsville, married to a man named Gary who used to run a moderately successful HVAC supply business until about 4 years ago, when a bad partnership and some bad decisions collapsed the whole thing out from under him. Since then, Gary's been doing odd consulting work that never quite adds up to a real income, and Carol works part-time at a dentist's office answering phones. They've got 2 kids of their own, grown now, and Carol never had a single kind word for me from the day I met her. I was 30 years old when Diane and I started dating, divorced already once myself from a marriage that lasted 18 months and taught me more about what not to do than anything else. I was running one shop, still paying off the lift, still driving a truck with 190,000 miles on it. Carol took one look at that and decided I was a project Diane didn't need. She never said it directly. People like Carol rarely do. It was in the way she'd ask, real sweet. So Frank, how's the little garage doing? Like she was checking in on a sick pet. I made a decision back then, and I held to it for a long, long time. I wasn't going to fight Carol. I loved Diane too much to turn every family dinner into a battlefield over my own pride. So I stayed quiet. I was polite. I let Diane handle her own sister, and I stayed out of the blast radius as much as I could. What Carol never bothered to notice, because she'd already made up her mind about me before I ever said a word, was that the business did just fine, better than fine. By the time I was 45, I had 3 locations and money in the bank that would have surprised her. But in Carol's mind, I was still the guy with the beat-up truck, furniture. Nice enough furniture, maybe, but furniture all the same. So when Gary's business fell apart 4 years ago, and the mortgage on their house in Strongsville started slipping behind, and their younger son needed help with a semester of community college tuition, Carol didn't come to me. Of course she didn't. She went to Diane. And Diane came to me the way she always does, quiet, a little embarrassed. Frank, I hate asking, but, and I told her the same thing every time. Take it from the joint account. Handle it. Keep the peace. I let Carol believe that money came from Diane's teacher pension and some family savings. It was easier than the conversation we'd have had otherwise. So for 4 years, Carol kept believing her baby sister was bailing her out, and kept believing that Diane's husband was just some guy who fixed cars and stayed out of the way. Mortgage assistance, tuition payments, a truck repair bill for Gary's work van that ran into the thousands. Never once did Gary call me directly. Always Diane. Because in Carol's world, I wasn't worth calling. The Saturday everything came apart was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. Sophie's graduation party, out in our backyard in Westlake, first real warm weekend of May. We had the good caterer, the one that does the little sliders everybody fights over. 45 people between family and friends, and half of Sophie's nursing school cohort. Michael had the day off and was manning the grill like it was a competitive sport. Diane had on this blue dress she'd bought special, and she looked 20 years younger in the afternoon light. And I remember thinking, standing there with a plate of sliders, that I didn't have a single thing in the world to complain about. I hadn't even clocked Carol watching me from over by the drink table. I noticed Michael first, actually. Before anything happened, I noticed he'd gone very still near the fence, and that's not like him. Michael doesn't go still. He's steady, calm, the kind of guy who talks people down from panic attacks for a living. But he was standing there with his jaw locked, and Gary and Carol's younger son, a kid named Brett, 20 years old, was standing a few feet away, looking like he'd just said something he already regretted. I walked over. "What's going on?" Michael didn't answer right away. It was Sophie who told me, coming up behind me, still in her graduation cap, tears already starting. Brett had made some comment, loud enough for a cluster of people to hear, about how Sophie's diploma should really have somebody else's last name on it, since Frank wasn't her real anything. And it was a little strange, wasn't it, that she'd bothered walking across a stage under a name that wasn't even biologically hers. I felt something shift in my chest that I want to describe accurately, because it wasn't just anger. It was colder than that. It was the feeling of a man who has quietly absorbed insults for 17 years, finally watching one of them land square on his daughter's graduation day. I put my hand on Sophie's shoulder and told her to go find her mother. Then I walked over to Brett, and I didn't yell. I didn't get in his face. I put a calm hand on his shoulder so he'd look at me instead of the 3 friends standing around him. "Hey," I said, "look at me." He looked up. "That girl earned that diploma, and she earned my last name a long time before today. Don't you ever say that again. Not to her, not about her." That was it. That was all I said. I don't know exactly what Carol saw from across the yard, but whatever picture formed in her head in those 3 seconds, it turned the whole backyard from a graduation party into dead silence in about 2 heartbeats. She came across that yard fast, grabbed Brett by the arm so hard he stumbled backward, and then she rounded on me and slapped me open-handed, hard enough that I heard it crack before I felt the sting. The whole yard went quiet. Somebody's phone was still playing music somewhere, and it suddenly sounded very loud in the silence. "Don't you ever put your hands on my son," she said, voice shaking, not from fear, from fury. "And don't stand there acting like her real father, Frank. You're not. You never have been. You just signed some papers." I touched my cheek. Before I could even get a word out, Diane was moving, cutting straight through the crowd, face pale, eyes wide with something between shock and rage. "Carol, what is wrong with you?" Diane's voice cracked but held. "You hit him? At Sophie's graduation party? In front of everyone?" Carol didn't even look at her sister. Her eyes were locked on me. I took a slow breath, gently moved Diane behind my shoulder, and looked at Carol. "I'm giving you 10 seconds to walk to your car," I said, calm, level, "before I call the police and have them walk you off my property in handcuffs." That's when Gary appeared, beer in hand, stepping in front of Carol like a human shield, chest puffed out the way men do when they know they're wrong but need to look otherwise. Whoa, Frank, let's not do anything crazy here." "She's a mother, man," she reacted. "You put your hands on our son first. Don't turn this into a whole thing." I looked at Gary for a long moment. Somewhere on the other side of the yard, one of Sophie's nursing school friends laughed at something, completely unaware of what had just happened 40 feet away. I smiled. The same easy, quiet smile I've used my whole life when I already know exactly how a conversation is going to end. Since you brought it up, I said, let's talk about what a real father actually does. I turned to Diane. Take the kids inside for a minute. I want you and I to talk to Sophie together in a bit. But right now, everyone else, go on and enjoy the party. This is done. We drove home from a party we technically hosted, in silence, in our own truck, an hour before we planned to leave. And it wasn't the angry kind of silence. It was the kind where a family has just been hit by something and needs a minute before anyone can talk about what comes next. Sophie sat in the back seat, still in her cap, staring out the window. Diane had her hands folded in her lap, very still, the way she gets when she's feeling something too big to speak yet. I kept both hands on the wheel and drove the 15 minutes back to our house in Westlake without saying a single word about what I was going to do. Not yet. We got home. Michael came by that evening with a pizza because apparently nobody felt like cooking, and the four of us sat around the kitchen table like a normal Saturday night, except my cheek was still faintly pink and nobody was pretending otherwise. After Sophie went up to bed, Diane found me in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking at me with the eyes she's had on me for 31 years, the ones that read me better than any contract I've ever signed. You okay? I'm fine. Frank. I looked at her. I'm fine. Diane. I promise. She was quiet a second. I'm so sorry. I should have shut her down years ago. I should have. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not okay, Frank. Her voice cracked slightly. She hit you. At Sophie's graduation. In front of Sophie's friends. She said you weren't. She stopped herself. I walked over and just held her for a minute. Then, I went into my office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I want to be clear about something. What I did next wasn't rage. It wasn't me throwing a tantrum because my pride got bruised at a party. It was a decision made by a man who had just watched his daughter cry on her own graduation day because of words that came straight out of his sister-in-law's house. I pulled up the recurring transfers connected to Carol and Gary's accounts, the monthly help with their mortgage, the tuition payments for Brett's community college classes, the occasional emergency that Gary would call Diane about directly, never me, because in Carol's version of the world, I was furniture. Expensive furniture, as it turned out, but furniture all the same. I canceled every single transfer, all of it, gone. I closed the laptop, went to bed, and slept better than I had in a long time. The first week was quiet on their end. No calls, no texts. I figured Carol was too proud to reach out first and too angry to think straight. And Gary was probably telling her it would blow over, that I'd cool down, that Diane would smooth it over like she always did. I went to work. I opened the shop Saturday morning like always. I took Sophie out for coffee to talk about her new job. I didn't think about Carol once. It was the second week when things started cracking. Diane started getting texts, then calls, and I could see her jaw tighten during them in a way that told me Carol's tone was shifting from cold to something more desperate. On a Wednesday, Diane came home from meeting a friend for lunch over in Rocky River with a look on her face I hadn't seen in years. Not sad, not angry. Done. Carol showed up, she said, setting her purse on the counter. I looked up from the paper. At the restaurant? Didn't call ahead. Just sat down across from me and started talking. About you. About how you're being petty, punishing the whole family because your pride got hurt over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Frank. She hit you in front of 40 people and half of Sophie's graduating class, and it was a misunderstanding. What did you say? Diane was quiet a moment, and I watched something move across her face, 17 years of biting her tongue, finally reaching the bottom of the barrel. I told her the truth. All of it. I straightened up. All of it? All of it, Frank. Her eyes were steady, no tears, just clarity. She needed to hear it. I'm done protecting her from the truth about who's actually been holding this family up. Later that evening, we sat out on the back patio, 2 glasses of iced tea going warm between us, and Diane walked me through what she'd said. When Carol finished her whole performance at that restaurant table, the sighing, the guilt trips, the don't you care about family routine, Diane had looked at her sister and said, quiet and even, it was never my money, Carol. Carol blinked. What? Every dollar that kept your lights on, that paid for Brett's classes, that covered your mortgage when Gary's business fell apart, that was Frank's money, not mine. His. He told me to let you think it was mine so you wouldn't have to deal with knowing the truth. He was protecting me from having to have this exact conversation. Silence. The man you slapped at our daughter's graduation, in front of her friends, has been quietly keeping your family afloat for 4 years while you told everyone he was just the guy who fixes cars. While your son was repeating whatever he hears at your dinner table into my daughter's face on the biggest day of her life, that was Frank paying for it. Carol apparently tried to say something. Diane didn't let her get there. And, while we're at it, you want to talk about real fathers? Frank adopted my kids when their own father walked out and never looked back. He's been at every recital, every practice, every graduation. He's twice the father Gary's ever managed to be, and you know it, which is exactly why it made you so angry to say it. When Diane got to that part of the story on our patio, she stopped talking for a second. I didn't say anything either. I looked out at our backyard, where 40 people had been eating sliders just 2 weeks before, and I felt something I genuinely wasn't expecting. Not satisfaction. Not vindication, just the particular weight of being truly known by somebody. Was she crying? I asked eventually. By the end, I didn't stick around to watch. I nodded. We sat a while longer. But here's what I knew that Diane didn't mention on that patio, because she didn't know it yet. The same day she had that lunch with Carol, I'd made 2 phone calls of my own. The first was to my attorney, a guy named Dennis who's handled my business contracts for almost 15 years and has a way of making people very uncomfortable over the phone in a very calm voice. I told him what happened at the party. I told him I had 6 witnesses, sober, credible, who'd already agreed in writing to what they saw. He didn't hesitate. I'll have something filed with the city prosecutor's office by Friday. The second call was to the bank holding Gary and Carol's mortgage. 2 years back, when they'd needed a modification to keep from losing the house, the lender required a co-signer to qualify for the restructured terms. Gary asked Diane. Diane asked me. I signed because, say it with me, I loved my wife and wanted to keep the peace. Well, peace had officially been canceled. I called the lender's risk department and told them that, as a co-signer, I had reason to believe Gary had concealed material changes to his income during the restructuring, specifically that the consulting income he'd claimed on the modification paperwork didn't match what I knew, through Diane, to be the real state of his finances. I laid out what I had. The bank rep on the other end of the line got very quiet, very procedural. Facts, process, timeline. They'd be reviewing the file by end of week. That's all it was on my end, too. Facts, process, timeline. I hung up, went back to the shop's quarterly numbers I'd been working on, and finished them before dinner. I don't let personal situations bleed into how I run a business. That discipline came from being 30 and broke, and watching everyone wait for me to fail. I didn't fail then, and I wasn't about to start now. If you've been with me a while, you know the drill. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed, because it's about to get good. Here's what I want you to understand about those 2 weeks. Nothing I did was loud. No confrontations, no angry calls at midnight, no showing up anywhere I wasn't invited. I went to work. I came home. I helped Sophie fill out her new hire paperwork for the hospital. I watched Michael's softball league game on Thursday and yelled from the bleachers, same as always. Underneath the normal surface of things, though, every decision I'd made was moving quiet and steady, the way water finds its way downhill without ever needing to hurry. Carol and Gary just didn't know it yet. That changed on a Thursday evening when Gary called. I was in the garage at home, changing my own oil, of all things, when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. Frank. A pause. The specific pause of a man who'd rehearsed a call and already forgotten his lines. Hey, look, Carol and I were thinking maybe we should all sit down, clear the air, somewhere neutral. Our treat. Their treat. I almost laughed, standing there with an oil filter wrench in my hand in my own garage in Westlake, Ohio. Sure, Gary, I said. Let's sit down. He sounded relieved, which told me everything about what he thought this dinner was going to be. Great, great. There's a place out on the water, Grande Vista, real nice patio. Saturday work? Saturday's fine. We're really looking forward to clearing this up, Frank. We're family. Family. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. See you Saturday, Gary. I stood there in my garage a moment after hanging up. They thought they were coming to negotiate. They had no idea they were walking into a closing statement. There's a particular kind of calm that settles over a man who's already made every decision that matters and is just waiting for everyone else in the room to catch up. That's exactly where I was Saturday evening. Grande Vista sat right on the edge of the reservoir out past Avon, terraced outdoor seating with a view good enough to almost distract from bad company. Almost. Diane and I got there first, we always do. I don't like walking into a room where everyone else is already settled. We got a table on the upper terrace, ordered waters, and watched the sun start its slow drop over the water, turning everything gold. Diane was quiet on the drive over. Not the broken kind of quiet, the resolved kind. 2 weeks of processing had left her jaw set in a way I recognized, the jaw of a woman who'd made peace with her own decisions. I reached over and took her hand. She squeezed back without looking up. Good enough for me. Carol and Gary showed up about 10 minutes late. Gary had on a button-down shirt he'd clearly ironed specifically for the occasion, which for Gary is the equivalent of a tuxedo. Carol had her hair done, holding her purse in both hands in front of her like a shield. They'd rehearsed this. I could tell right away. Gary went for the handshake first. Firm. 2 pumps. Too much eye contact. Frank. Good to see you, man, really. He nodded at Diane. Diane. Diane nodded back once. The temperature at the table dropped a good 4 degrees. Carol slid into her chair with the exact smile of someone who needs something from you and hates you a little for it. Frank, Carol, we ordered. Gary got a beer, of course. Carol got white wine. We made about 4 minutes of small talk about traffic on I-90 before Gary cleared his throat and squared his shoulders, hands folded on the table, the picture of rehearsed sincerity. Look, man, we know things got heated at the party. Carol shouldn't have happened. We apologize for that. He glanced at Carol, who nodded on cue. But you've got to understand, she was stressed. She saw you grab Brett's arm, and she reacted. She's a mother. And honestly, he paused for effect, cutting off help for the family over one bad moment. That's a little extreme, don't you think? Feels like you're punishing everybody because your pride got hurt. Another pause. Then the line he'd clearly been saving. Honestly, it almost feels like you set us up to look bad. He sat back. Carol nodded along slowly, wine glass turning between her fingers. There it was. The full performance. Half apology, pivot to justification, land on making me the problem. Classic. I let the silence sit a moment, took a slow sip of water, set the glass down exactly where it had been. Then I smiled the same smile from the backyard in Westlake. Gary, you didn't invite me here to apologize. He blinked. What? No, man, we genuinely... You invited me here because your mortgage is due. Dead silence. Somewhere behind us a table erupted in laughter over something. Someone's birthday. Completely different universe. You're not sorry Carol hit me, I said, calm as a board meeting. You're sorry I'm the one holding the checkbook. Now hang on, Gary started. I'm not finished. Quiet. No heat. Just fact. And Gary, to his credit, or maybe just his instinct for self-preservation, stopped talking. I looked at Carol directly. For the first time in 17 years, I wasn't stepping back, wasn't managing the temperature, wasn't protecting anyone's comfort at the expense of my own. You stood in front of 40 people, including my daughter's friends on her graduation day, and told me I wasn't a real father, that I just signed some papers. Carol opened her mouth. Don't, Diane said. One word, quiet, as a door closing. Carol shut her mouth. I continued. You've believed for 17 years that I was nobody, that Diane was carrying this family alone, that I was the guy who fixed cars and stayed out of the way. I let you believe that. That's on me. I thought I was keeping the peace. What I was actually doing was financing a version of reality that was comfortable for you and invisible to me. That ends tonight. Gary shifted in his seat, the rehearsed composure cracking at the edges. A complaint's been filed with the city prosecutor's office, I said. Gary's beer paused halfway to his mouth. They're reviewing it. Assault, Gary. Not a family disagreement, not a heated moment. I have 6 witnesses. Sober, credible, who've already given written statements. What I don't have is any interest in pretending this was a misunderstanding. Carol's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Frank. Her voice had lost every trace of the rehearsed tone. This was the real one. Smaller, tighter. Frank. Look, I know I went too far. I know that. But criminal charges? We're family. You told my daughter on her graduation day, in front of her friends, that she doesn't have my real name, I said, without raising my voice, through your son. Then you crossed a yard and hit me. Let that sit for a second, because this isn't about family politics anymore. The gold evening light was doing something beautiful over the water. Gary set his beer down. Okay, Frank, I hear you. The charges, all right, that's serious, we get it. But let's talk about the financial stuff. The mortgage, Brett's classes, those are real consequences for our kid. He didn't do anything. Brett repeated what he hears at your dinner table, I said. Those are your consequences and Carol's. But the cosign is done. I reached into my jacket and set a single folded document on the table, slid it toward Gary. That's the formal notice from my attorney. When you left out the real state of your income during the mortgage modification 2 years ago, Gary, that's fraud on a federal loan document. I reported it to the bank's risk department last week. My name's officially off the liability, and the modified terms have been revoked, effective immediately. The acceleration notice follows separately. If it hasn't arrived yet, it will Monday. Gary unfolded it with hands that weren't steady. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. Foreclosure starts whenever the bank initiates it, I said. That timeline's between you and them now. I'm not part of that conversation anymore. You can't, Gary looked up. Frank, you can't just, we've got a kid in that house. You've got a kid in that house, I said. Which is exactly the kind of thing a real father thinks about before the damage is done, not after. That one landed where it was supposed to. Carol made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Eyes glassy, wine untouched. The monthly help is canceled. The tuition assistance is canceled. Every dollar that moved between our 2 households moved because I loved my wife enough to keep the peace at my own expense. That arrangement needed a basic level of respect underneath it. You knocked that foundation out in about 10 seconds at my daughter's graduation party. Frank, please. Carol's voice actually broke. The performance, the entitlement, all of it, gone. What was left was a woman staring at consequences she never truly believed would come. I'm asking you. I'll apologize, publicly, however you want. I'll call the prosecutor myself. Frank, our house. Here's the part I want you to sit with, because I felt something in that moment I wasn't expecting. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not the hot, sharp feeling of winning. Something quieter, the feeling of a door finally closing on a room you've been trapped in for a very long time. I stood up, buttoned my jacket. I spent 17 years protecting your feelings, Carol. That's over. From here on, I'm only protecting my own family. That's my wife and my kids, who belong in every single room they walk into, on paper and off it. I picked my phone up off the table. Good luck with the bank, and good luck covering dinner. I put my hand out to Diane. She took it without a moment's hesitation, stood, rose to her full height, the way she does when she's completely certain. Carol reached out and grabbed her sister's arm. Diane, please, just... Diane looked down at her sister's hand, then at her sister. I love you, she said, simple as anything, but I'm done managing what you refuse to take responsibility for. We walked out through the restaurant together, past a table with birthday balloons, past a cheerful hostess who called out to have a good night, and into the warm evening air. The valet brought the truck around. I tipped him. We got in, and I pulled out onto the road that runs along the water. Diane was quiet for about 2 minutes. Then she said, "Good luck covering dinner," and started laughing. Not the polite kind, the real, full-body kind. I fell for 33 years ago in a diner off Lorraine Road when she was 26, and I was the broke guy in the next booth who asked to borrow a lighter he didn't even need. I started laughing too. We laughed for most of the drive home, before either of us said another word. Here's what happened after. The city prosecutor moved forward with the case. Carol took a plea, a formal assault charge. community service, and a protective order keeping her a set distance from me and my kids for a year. No trial, no public spectacle, just paperwork and consequences. The bank started foreclosure proceedings about 7 weeks after that dinner. Gary and Carol found a smaller rental out in Elyria. Brett finished his semester at community college on his own dime, working nights at a hardware store to cover it. About 2 months after the graduation party, Brett sent Sophie a handwritten letter. Diane showed it to me. He apologized, not the calculated, angling kind of apology his father performed at that restaurant, but the clumsy, sincere kind a 20-year-old writes when somebody's finally gotten through to him. I kept that letter in my desk drawer. It reminded me the kid wasn't the villain. He'd just been handed the wrong script by the grown-ups around him, and maybe somebody had finally handed him a better one. I never gloated. Not once, not to family, not online, not in a single text message. That was never what this was about. This was never about breaking Carol. It was about finally stopping her. Sophie asked me something one evening a few weeks later, while I was helping her hang her new hospital ID badge on a hook by the front door. She turned around and said, out of nowhere, "Dad, am I really a Coleman?" I set the badge down. "Come here," I said. She's 22 years old and still let me pull her into a hug like she was 7 again. "You've been the realest Coleman I know since the day your mother and I brought you home," I told her. "You understand me?" She thought about it. That same serious look she's had since she was a kid. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." Then she picked the badge back up and went to go show her brother. 17 years of staying quiet. 17 years of stepping back. 17 years of writing checks and keeping the peace while a family stood in the background and never bothered to look close enough to see who was actually holding it all up. And in the end, it took one slap, one smile, and the quiet, unhurried decision of a man who finally stopped protecting the wrong people. My name is Frank Coleman. I'm 61 years old. I live in Westlake, Ohio, and every single person under my roof carries my name on purpose. That's what a real father does. If this one hit home for you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I'll see you on the next one.